has any comments or questions?
Well, I had something that was, if it, I was wondering if the board had had a chance to see this article in the Sunday Times. That this gives you all of the Lackawanna County tax rates. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts or about the fact that if we do raise the taxes, we will be higher than every single number. Our taxes will be higher than everybody in Lackawanna County.
How so?
Sunday.
Like, I
The-
mean, I know they have
the school
numbers,
district
I did read the full
taxes.
article in the paper.
Yeah,
I did see
they have it
that.
on the last part there, A13. They have it by school district taxes, not the municipality taxes. But our school taxes will be higher than every single
I think
one
they
in the
already
state.
are, they already are higher than all of us anyway.
Mhm,
It's
right.
not like-
So another
We're not
year,
going above, we're already above.
but we're going above again.
Yeah.
so
yeah,
all of
but I'm saying
Lackawanna
we're
County-
already-
But it's just,
And it-
I was
it
just
is
wondering
hard
if you
to
saw the
compare when you're
numbers.
looking between counties, just because of assessments across counties. The
Mhm.
state does do a report and it equalizes millage and takes out some of those factors that would be disparaging for different, county by county. And on those reports, we are one of the lower ones in the state. Like out of 500 districts, we're in the 400 and something.
Are those districts close to us, or?
It's a statewide report, and I don't know where the others locally stand, but I
Right.
know for us, when they equalize it, which takes out those different county assessments and the different factors, when it just looks across millage
Right.
Statewide, we are in
Because
one of
it's
the
hard to
lower
find,
categories.
this is really a nice article because it has everything consolidated in there, but it was hard to find a lot of information about how other districts are and how other counties are. Are they, because we're higher than Lackawanna, are we higher than,
I do know a lot of surrounding
Missouri
districts are
and-
considering tax increases
Mhm.
above and beyond
Right.
what we are considering.
right?
2-3%, they're looking at, some areas, some are looking at 5, and I believe it was Lackawanna Trail had 5 or 6%.
Right.
So, I would say we're on the lower end, if not one of the lowest in the area in terms of,
You mean
What we're
other
considering this-
than this county?
I would say even some in Lackawanna County as well, with
But
the
tax
percentage
would
increase,
increase.
with the percentage increase.
Oh, the percentage increase, right. Well, I know Scranton's in a lot of disarray. They have to increase theirs a lot. But that was one of my questions, if I could, if you don't mind. I had another question here. When we're talking about the general fund being in the Wayne Bank account, if I remember right, Rose had said it was 0.81, right? There seem to be some other organizations that will, through boroughs and school districts, that can do investments through the state. There are some trusts. I was having a discussion with somebody that's on a community, they're part of their board, and they said that they do have other places that you can place the money.
Right,
and it's
there are some things like the school district there is a statewide group that does do,
Mhm.
that we can invest money through. We
Right.
have had discussions, and it was probably a couple of years ago that we discussed it, but it was always felt that we did want to keep the money in the local banks,
Mhm.
and we've continued to do that. But
Okay.
most recently, because I do get the interest rate figures from that, it's
Mhm.
called P's de Lef, and those are letters, and I
Yes,
can't right now.
yeah, that's what she
You
said,
don't know what
yes.
all of the letters stand for, I can't think of it
Right,
off the
right.
top, but they're about 1.3, 1.4%, but there's a
Okay.
lot of, there's dollar limits, there's transaction limits, there's a lot
Mhm,
of different things
right.
that are entailed
So
in that.
would-
But it is something that we can look
Like
at
double
futuristically.
our
A little
earnings?
bit less than that.
So we'd be
with-
talking about maybe, if we're doing 100,000, then maybe.
Yeah, but there's limits on those accounts, there's limits on how
Mhm.
much you can put in, and then how much you can withdraw, and how much notice that you need to give them, so there's a lot more,
She said her community couldn't do it because they didn't have enough funds, but when I told her we had, a larger amount, she said, yeah, they really wanted to get into it. They thought it was a really good idea.
it is an opportunity, it is an option, and we can talk about
Okay.
it, I can certainly get more information if the board is interested, if we wanna look at doing that futuristically.
She said there were all different kinds, there were like like 10 or 12 different types of
There might
investments,
be
some
for
really short
municipalities,
term.
but I know there is one that is school district.
And she got it was specifically for school districts and municipalities, so I'm not familiar, but she seemed to be quite familiar with it. So I told her I would ask about it and see. She might actually come to one of the meetings. She had some information. She said she might come to the
I
meeting.
mean, I
today.
do have information on that, I do get that.
Okay.
I actually have it on my desk because I've been watching their interest
Okay,
rates.
so I promised her I would talk to you about that. Another question I had was, last meeting, item 21 was when we were talking about the bleachers. And that was an addendum that we were changing the bleachers from going from, if I have it correct, from going from the fund balance to the general obligation bond. Is that right? Does that change our percentage? You had given us a percentage with the original meeting, 7.7% of the, and we have like a limit for 8%, is that correct? Am I doing that correctly?
I'm not sure.
So when you had on the bottom of your numbers, you said based on how much we had in the fund balance, and now we're doing it from the bond.
Fund balance, I think,
There's
You're
some
talking
sort
about
of,
the percentage of fund balance to the overall budget. Is that what you're?
is that how they list it in
Yeah, I
this,
think that's
in the
what- yeah.
recommendations? Because again, somebody's saying, don't we have a limit on how much taxes we can ask for depending on how much we've taken from parts of the fund balance? They want to know if we were at 7.7% and then we changed from the fund balance to the general obligation bond, was that going to change our percentages? Because it was, those bleachers were going to be,
Yeah, the bleacher cost is about $630,000 with all of the, everything factored
right,
in. It's about that, and what we did talk about last work session, was whether or not we were gonna take that money, that $600,000 out of our fund balance to pay for the bleachers and not
Okay.
take it out of the general obligation note. It's a note, not a bond.
okay, it's a note,
the-
okay.
Yeah, it's a general obligation note.
Okay.
There was discussions about that, but what was passed at the tentative budget
Mhm.
was that we were not going to take it out of fund balance,
Okay,
and we were going to borrow it out of the note.
okay.
So we were gonna take that $630,000,
Mhm.
draw it off the note, instead of out of fund balance. So that was something that was discussed.
Okay, and will that still leave us in that percentage that,
Well, yeah, it would be close to that 7.7, 7.8 of, that's unassigned fund balance.
okay,
That's the percentage of that, because we have 3 different factors for our fund balance. There's a
Mhm.
committed section, there's an assigned, and then there's an unassigned.
Okay.
Our unassigned fund balance can be up to 8%
okay.
of our.
So
of our
up
budget.
to 8%, and we were at 7.7,
something, yeah.
so what does that, like if you do 7.7 and 8% out of the balance, is that like $500,000 or is it less than 500? Because, you know what I mean, like if you're moving,
I didn't factor that percentage-wise. I
Okay.
know I did do some numbers, let me see. No, I don't have them. When I changed it back to taking it out of the note, I took those numbers out, because I'd redone the numbers for the original
Right.
budget.
this
to
is
see
one
what
of the
those
problems
percentages
with,
would be, and I'm sorry, I don't have that.
talking to folks about the fact that we have another, and they ask you questions, and I said, ooh, I don't have that answer for you, but I know somebody who will have that answer for you. So that was one of the other questions they had
We do
was,
have from this year's budget, the 17-18, we did factor in using about 300,000 of that.
Mhm. right,
So that would bring that 7.7 down a little to begin with,
right,
because I think I started the budget with a $10 million fund balance rather than the 10.3. So it's a
Right,
small factor,
it's
but it does
close,
change
yeah.
the numbers. And then, of course, our budget, based on our expenses that increase every year, that those percentages fluctuate
Mhm.
too.
They seem to be very familiar with that
last year's budget.
8%, that was like a number that you
That's
had
where
to.
the range of expenses our budget falls into is 8%.
Mhm.
Someone with a lower budgeted number could have like 10% higher budgeted. Ours is, like, our budget's roughly in the $40 million range, a little bit higher than that. Those districts that are higher than that would have a lower percentage than the 8%. It kind of, it is scaled for each of
Okay,
the
all
different
right, so,
size districts, I should say.
sure, and I promise only one more question. We're doing a lot of talking this weekend because the that's coming up. Something I'd never heard of, it's a contingency fund. This was from a very well-versed person. A contingency fund, so to avoid, pardon me if I mispronounce this, fungible worries where you can't distinguish the monies, you keep it in an unallocated or a contingency fund. So
I'm
it's
unaware
a-
of that term with.
it
my-
was a
the only
way
thing I have
for-
with contingency funds is with our special ed expenses.
Oh, yes, yeah, they did mention that.
Okay,
Special ed
'cause
is like
there
a
is-
totally separate
The
reason
state
for
has
it.
a separate, budget category that is,
Mhm.
it's called contingency funds. We all the districts get a certain, special ed subsidy.
Okay.
But there are what they call contingency funds. So if we
Okay.
have one student or several students that have a high threshold, so we have a $200,000 expense for one of our students based on their special needs,
Mhm.
we can apply to the state for additional funding
Okay,
for those students, and we do. We apply on a yearly basis for any of them that are over the threshold. I think
Okay.
last year's threshold was about $90-some thousand. So
Okay.
if we had one student that cost us more than that, we can apply for these contingency funds, which
okay,
we do have students that are more than that do cost us more than that, and we apply for them. But it's on a rolling scale based on, the wealth of the district, how much money
Mhm.
they have in the fund, how many districts applied for it. I can tell you that in the 18 years that I'm here, I think we've applied for it probably 15 of those 18, and we've never received any money.
and this,
It's usually, it's a pot of money, and they, on the scale that they use, they give away until it's all gone.
okay.
And we've never gotten to the point where we've been eligible for the money.
Well, this gentleman's way out of my league of understanding, but his suggestion was that if the state actually provided us with the funds that you were concerned that we needed to raise the taxes for, that he wanted to know, can we place the taxes in a contingency fund? So if we find that we don't actually need the taxes that we have procured by raising the taxes, can we put the money in a contingency fund so that it does not become a part of the money you can't distinguish from all the other funds? There's $400,000.
Yeah, that I don't know. That would be more like a legal question. We would have to
Mhm.
get legal advice.
So
on
he,
it.
he
I
said,
do
you
not
know, that he knows about contingency funds because of the
And what I just
special
described is
education.
not that same thing.
Right,
That is-
he said he
that's a
knows
separate
about
one.
them
That's
because
separate.
of that, and he says, can we use, if we find that we don't need these taxes, if they're, I don't wanna say surplus, but they're not required for this year because the state actually does provide us with the $400,000 worth of money, can we put that money aside to make sure it doesn't get mixed in with all the other money? And he also wanted to know if we have the ability to earn interest and make $100,000, do we need to raise the taxes $400,000 instead of
I
$300,000?
do factor in the interest that we would
Mhm.
receive as part of our budget. So I've already factored that into the revenue before we had the
So that's
$400,000
separate,
need.
the
It's a-
interest?
It's a separate line item, it's a revenue item in my budget, so that is factored in. I did factor in what the potential is for the state revenue, the
Mhm.
increases, what they've provided to us. Now, as of today, they have not passed a budget yet, so I don't
Right.
have final numbers, but I have included what the state is planning on or looking into giving us,
Mhm.
which for, basic ed subsidy is about $140,000. The special ed subsidy is about another $10,000 or $11,000. I factored those in with the anticipation that we will get that money. Now, if they are looking at additional funding for us, I
Mhm.
don't know of it.
Okay,
I'm not aware of it,
Right.
and that's something that we'd have to look
I'm-
at. And a
I'm
lot of
familiar
times
with
if that
that,
happens
yeah.
after our budget is passed, the
Mhm.
state directs us of how we're supposed to handle any of our millage increases or any changes or how we spend that money if they end up giving us more than what we were anticipating based on the budgeted
so the
numbers
state
they've
tells
given
you
us.
how you can use the
They
taxes
have in the
you've taken?
past, when it's come in late, and
Mhm.
it's, everybody's already passed their budget and
Mm-hmm.
anticipated one thing, and then, they make some changes and it comes late, but at those times, and it's happened several years, where they direct us what we need to do and how we
Okay.
need to handle our millage, changes to that, or how we
Mhm.
spend the additional money. Sometimes, you know, when we had a lot of additional federal money several years ago, they directed us to very specific items so we can spend that additional money that we got.
So they tell you can only spend it, you can't invest it?
I don't know what they would do this year, but I know in the past they have done that.
To tell you have to spend the money?
And I'm just looking back historically,
Right,
knowing what
'cause
they've done.
Since
over
I've been
the years.
coming to the board meetings, having more funds has not been a problem. This is the first time that we've had 10 million since I've been coming. I think I started out with 800,000 when I first started coming to the meetings, so. All right. well,
Good
thank you.
management has got us back in a pretty good place.
Mhm. Right,
I
so
think the
now
board
my,
over the last few years has made a lot of changes
right,
to, you know, with negotiations, we've made changes.
right,
There's been a lot of factors that have helped. We've gotten reimbursed for a lot of items that, you know, we had been paying out our own
Mhm.
funds over the years
Right.
because, you know, of certain things, our debt service, you know, we
Right.
paid for about 8 years on our
Yeah.
evergreen bonds,
sure.
both our side and the state side for many years, and that's really how we got down to the about 800,000 in fund balance. But, you know, those funds have started coming back in reimbursements to us.
So now the folks that I'm talking to are no longer wondering what's going to be cut. Are we gonna lose music? Are we gonna lose art? Now they're wondering how we're going to invest the money and why do we need to have higher taxes if we have $10 million? Those kinds of questions. And where can it go so that it maybe can earn more interest and that kind of stuff. Different questions for me.
We do have quite a few limitations on how we can invest the money.
Right,
And that's state
right.
driven in
Yeah.
school code.
Right, that company or trust or whatever it was from the person that's on the council. Well, thank you so much for answering all my questions, I appreciate that.
I'm gonna take me just to answer one of her questions there about the assessments. I happened to be on a project last week, it's in South Canada, and I'm board in Lackawanna County.
Okay,
The county line basically cut this property in half.
okay,
Lackawanna County taxes were 2.5 times the South Canada taxes as far as.
wow.
on-
Well, this is the,
On the same unimproved farm.
do you want to take
No,
this?
I
and
mean,
look
I
at it?
got it on, I read it, but I'm just, you
Yeah,
know, when they say that our millage is higher, the
Yeah.
property value is right there,
yeah,
kind of.
yeah, and they're very specific too, they have it all,
Franklin County 2.5 times more than does Wayne County.
yeah.
Western Wayne, North Baltimore gets more than Western Wayne.
I think Lackawanna has not been assessed in 40 or 50 years.
That would do it.
And Wayne County was, and Wayne County was 15,
2000s.
yeah. So our assessment values are much closer to the fair market value
But things
than
are weird.
Lackawanna, so the millages look very different.
Yeah, their highest millage here was 0.162, it seems.
But what they're saying is the assessed values are.
Times.
Right,
Right.
then on,
Yeah.
and we have a more current assessment.
Well, but his would be a newer assessment also, because anytime you do something, like you buy property or something, it's automatically assessed at current market value. His would be on- Well, he is building his home.
I was gonna say, on the Wayne County
And
side?
on Wayne County.
Smart man.
Make sure the bedroom is in Wayne County, that's
He's
where the shop
developing
goes to
it.
school.
Is that
The master bedroom.
Yeah, really?
Okay, this will move to the agenda. We have reports, approval of bills, student recognition, public, our attendance report. So we left a few students. And 11 is the final adoption of the 18-19 budget. And we have proposed numbers there. Tax millage at 16.9 and 2% discount. It's paid within 2 months after the tax notice. Okay, do you have any questions on that?
Yeah, there was a lot of
There's a lot.
discussion about the tax increase. The board, you know, shared with one another. We had good conversations back and forth on the proposed 1.5. You know, there's some who made good points that there's no reason to. I'll just speak first and say, I'm not in favor of going zero, and Rose will show and give some stats as to what happens when we do nothing, and we've already done nothing last year. However, I felt comfortable with cutting it in half and going 0.75%. So, sort of meeting in between, per se. And I know what others will.
I'm all about saying no, but I'm all about compromise also. So I'll meet you at 3/4.
And Rose, I asked at the last meeting to look at the historical data and she has the numbers there.
Yeah, I can go over some of them, and I did run some preliminary numbers if we change that from increasing to 1.5%. I ran it at 1%, I ran it at 0.75%, and of course if it was 0, so we can talk about that. But just to talk about the millage a little bit, historically, we had run some numbers probably a year or two ago, back to, I have these printed from 0405. And just basically, you know, what our millage looked like when we went with 0, what happened those following years, like where we were and what we needed. So in 06, 07, we did a 0% increase in our taxes. But then in 07 and 08, and we did over 5% each of those years, you know, because of, it's kind of like if you're looking at, you can't just look at the 1 year, you do have to look at future years because of the Act 1 index. You know, we're required to stay within the index. This current year's index is 2.4%. So, you know, we don't increase the taxes at all again this year, so then the millage stays at rates from 2 years ago. But 3 years down the road, you know, you need the money that you didn't take 2 years ago, you need the money you didn't take the next year, and you need the money that you need for the next year. So it kind of like, it builds to being what you need. Then again, in like 2009 and 10, we did a 0%. The following year, we did 3.4%, and then like a 2%, and then we did a 6% 1 year. So it cycles through, like when you do 0, I understand that's the preference, and we like to stay as close to that as we can, but you know, everything increases every year. All the expenses, all our insurances go up every year, our salaries go up each year because of contracted rates, utilities go up, everything, you know, does increase, so we do have to keep up with it. Unfortunately, our state funding doesn't always keep up with everything else that does increase. I could pass it around if anybody wants to look at any of the numbers and where we were over the years. But what I did is I ran, so the proposal that we had for the tentative budget and what we passed was a 1.5% increase. That would have generated about $401,000, and that would have covered the deficit we had between our expenses and our revenue. If we looked at reducing that to 1%, that would generate about $267,000, and then we would use about $134,000 out of fund balance, and that would be a 1% increase. Or I also looked at 0.75%, which is the halfway between the two. So then that would generate about $200,000 of increased taxes, and then we would use about $200,000 of our fund balance to cover. So we would do half and half from both sides. You know, half out of fund balance and half out of millage increase. So that's 0.75. That would be roughly about $12 on every $100,000 of assessed value. It would be a $12 increase if we did the